Srimad-Bhagavatam class on Friday the 2nd of July, and as per normal and tradition we will chant a little Jai Radha Madhava to begin. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodhana Dhanna Braja Janaranjana Yashodhana Dhanna Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodhana Dhanna Braja Janaranjana Yashodhana Dhanna Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodhanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodhanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 14, The Disappearance of Lord Krishna. And today we're reading from Text 2. Vyatītāḥ katicin māsās, tadā nāyāt tato rjunaḥ, dadarśa ghora-rūpāṇi, nimittāni kurūdvahaḥ. Vyatītāḥ katicin māsās, tadā nāyāt tato rjunaḥ, dadarśa ghora-rūpāṇi, nimittāni kurūdvahaḥ. Excuse me. Vyatītāḥ katicin māsās, tadā nāyāt tato rjunaḥ, dadarśa ghora-rūpāṇi, nimittāni kurūdvahaḥ. Vyatītāḥ katicin māsās, tadā nāyāt tato rjunaḥ, dadarśa ghora-rūpāṇi, nimittāni kurūdvahaḥ. Vyatītāḥ katicin māsās, tadā nāyāt tato rjunaḥ, dadarśa ghora-rūpāṇi, nimittāni kurūdvahaḥ. Vyatītāḥ, after passing, katicin, a few, māsās, months, tadā, at that time, nāyāt, did not return, tadā, from there, Arjuna, dadarśa, observed, ghora, fearful, rūpāṇi, appearances, nimittāni, various causes, kurūdvahaḥ, Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira. Translation. A few months passed and Arjuna did not return. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira then began to observe some inauspicious omens which were fearful in themselves. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Lord Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is ad infinitum, more powerful than the most powerful sun of our experience. Millions and billions of suns are created by Him and annihilated by Him within His one breathing period. In the material world, the sun is considered to be the source of all productivity and material energy, and only due to the sun can we have the necessities of life. Therefore, during the personal presence of the Lord on the earth, all paraphernalia for our peace, prosperity, especially religion and knowledge, were in full display because of the Lord's presence. Just as there is a full flood of light in the presence of the glowing sun. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira observed some discrepancies in his kingdom, and therefore he became very anxious about Arjuna, who was long absent, and there was also no news about Dwarka's well-being. He suspected the disappearance of Lord Krishna, otherwise there would have been no possibility of fearful omens. I'll just read the translation again. A few months passed and Arjuna did not return. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira then began to observe some inauspicious omens which were fearful in themselves. Om Ajana Timarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swaya Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swa Padantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. The title of this chapter alone, The Disappearance of Lord Krishna, is a title that none of us rejoice in one sense, because why would we ever want Krishna to disappear? Of course, in one sense, in an absolute sense, Krishna never disappears, but in a relative sense, and what we're discussing now, and the title of the chapter, The Disappearance of Lord Krishna. Krishna's leaving his manifest pastimes at this point. Yeah, so Krishna's departure was to signal the end of Dwapara Yuga and usher in the advent of the most inauspicious age that we know, Kali Yuga. little bit of a sore throat, hopefully nothing too serious. So as to the departure of Lord Krishna, it ushers in Kali Yuga, which is the most inauspicious of the ages. And hence, as is described here in the purport, that Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira is experiencing great anxiety because of that reality, and he's experiencing some particularly inauspicious or fearful, is the word mentioned, fearful omens. And of course, fear is one of the emotions that we least like and least welcome, like that. None of us like to be in a fearful state. It affects us in so many different ways. Of course, notwithstanding that the fact that Kali Yuga is approaching and is being ushered in. So notwithstanding that, and the fact that it's the most inauspicious of ages, people are short-lived, and it's an iron age, we're dull-headed, there's so many negative aspects to Kali Yuga. It's the most inauspicious of ages. But notwithstanding that, there is one redeeming quality, if you like, of Kali Yuga, and it's an extraordinary redeeming quality, because Krishna descends in the form of his holy name, Kaladoshe Nidhe Rajan Asti Eko Mahan Guna. So Krishna's coming down in the form of his holy name, Kirtanadeva Krishnasya Mukta Sangha Parambrajet, and that's Sukadeva Goswami speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, and he's explaining that although Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults, there's one good, as I say, redeeming quality about this age of Kali, and that's simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, one can become free from material bondage and be promoted to the transcendental kingdom, the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan. And as we've been discussing for quite some time now in the previous chapter, with Dhritarashtra quitting home, and the whole process that he was going through to extract himself from the material world. In Kali Yuga, we do not have to go through any of that process. It's been made so simple for us. And it's simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra we can achieve perfection. We can achieve the topmost perfection. So there's no compromise, in terms of the achievement of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. You can go to Goloka Vrindavan, the topmost planet in the spiritual world, and engage with Krishna in one of the 5 primary rasas. There's just nothing that can be, there's nothing superior to that. So the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra affords us that. And on top of that, it's the most direct and speediest way for achieving perfection. So yes, Kali Yuga is a tough yuga. It's a tough gig, it's a tough yuga, and no doubt about that whatsoever. But at the same time, it has this incredible auspiciousness to it as it relates to the descent of Krishna in the form of his holy name, as described by Sukadeva Goswami. So that's definitely worth mentioning when we mention. We always talk, don't we, in the material world about pros and cons, and creating lists of the pros, and the cons of any given situation. So the list of cons as it relates to Kali Yuga is just, it's off the page. You talk about A4 sheets, you're going to need, whatever. You're going to need A1 super duper duper to try to have all the negative aspects, the cons of Kali Yuga listed on it. On the other side, you'll have this one pro, this one positive, and it outweighs by 1,000,000 miles all the cons on the other side of that sheet, like that. And then today in the purport, regarding the first few sentences of that purport, and let's just reflect on those again quickly. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is ad infinitum more powerful than the most powerful sun of our experience. Millions and billions of suns are created by him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and annihilated by him within his one breathing period. So, these are extraordinary statements. Recently, actually, you may have heard, we hear it all the time in one sense, but it's just to give an indication. there's a heat wave currently in I think the west coast of America, Canada, like that, and they're experiencing record temperatures of something like 50 degrees, and people are dying because of the heat, and and they're having fires and all of that kind of stuff. Part of the inauspiciousness of Kali Yuga, I guess. But it's interesting, that's just one sun that we have in this universe. And here we're talking, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is talking about millions and billions of suns created and annihilated by Krishna in just one of his breathing durations like that. And of course, as we know, how many millions upon millions of breaths that we have in a lifetime. So Mahavishnu and the incredible duration of his existence, and his breathing, and all these millions of billions of suns are being created, and then of course being annihilated like that. So the extraordinary power and vastness of Krishna's creation, the cosmic manifestation that we're all part of, it's just the whole thing is just so incredible. And Srila Prabhupada explains elsewhere in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, he's talking that it's not that Krishna himself was transformed into the material creation. Rather, it's Krishna who is expanding himself by his different energies and his plenary portions that is responsible for this incredible creation. But Krishna's separate from it. It's described how the starting of the process of creation of the material cosmos is Krishna simply glances. And oftentimes when I say that, I sort of move my head, but actually you don't even need to move your head when you glance. It's just your eyes that you need to move. So that's all that Krishna does. It's not that Krishna's part of this as such, and certainly not affected by it in any way, but he just sets in train a whole sequence of events like that, and then his expansions and his plenary portions carry out all the thing. And Krishna's completely aloof from the whole process, if you like. So in a corner of the spiritual sky, the Brahmajyoti, sometimes a cloud appears, and when that cloud appears, Krishna, by his plenary portion as Mahavishnu, as we were talking, he lies down in the water of the Mahatattva, which is known as the causal ocean. So he's lying down in that, and while Mahavishnu is lying within the causal ocean, innumerable, love the words are fantastic, innumerable, you cannot numerate, you cannot count them, innumerable universes are generated along with the breathing of Mahavishnu, and then those universes, they're floating and they're scattered all over the causal ocean, and they stay just for the duration of the breathing period of Mahavishnu, which is an extraordinary length of time, billions upon billions, trillions, of our, Lord Brahma, who was part of this process, the end part of this process. Am I right to state we're talking, is it 31 trillion years or something, the duration of Brahma's life? I should have checked that before I spoke today. But we're just talking extraordinary expanses of time like that. And then in each and every one of those universes that's generated by Mahavishnu, Vishnu enters again in the form of Garbhodakshay Vishnu and lies there on the serpent-like Shesha, Lord Shesha incarnation. And then, as just mentioned, from his navel, Kshirodakshay Vishnu's navel, sprouts a lotus stem, and from that lotus stem, that's where Lord Brahma is born. And then it's Lord Brahma who is the primary creator of the material world and the material universes that we're both in and experiencing like that. And it's Lord Brahma who creates all different forms of living entities and different shapes in terms of the different desires that those entities have, etc. And it's Lord Brahma that creates the sun god, the moon god, and other demigods. Now it's really interesting here. So Lord Brahma, you've Krishna, who glances, then Mahavishnu, and then Kshirodakshay Vishnu, and then from Kshirodakshay Vishnu is coming Lord Brahma, and then Lord Brahma is the one who's creating all this and all the suns, etc. So you can just see the scale of what we're talking about, because we only get to experience a tiny fraction. Like, we can't emphasize that enough. An absolute tiny fraction of what Lord Brahma is creating. But Lord Brahma is just the end of the supply chain, for want of a better way of putting it. So you just get some sense of the extraordinary vastness of all of this and all of creation like that. But it is Krishna, glancing like that, who is the ultimate creator, if you like, of all the moving and non-moving aspects of the whole creation. Aham savasya prabhuvo mata savam pravartate. I am the source. This is Krishna speaking from the Bhagavad Gita. I am the source of all material and spiritual worlds. Everything is emanating from me. But of course, as we've discussed, Krishna is not, that glance means that he's responsible for everything, but he's not affected by any of this. He's simultaneously, if you like, the creator, but completely 100% aloof from everything to do with the material world like that. And then in that connection about the vastness of it all, because I always find it stunning and really fascinating that, Prabhupada explains there's two types of knowledge. There's ascending, acquiring knowledge. That we can do it through the ascending process, or we can do it through the descending process. And then Prabhupada goes on to explain. He gives the example, actually, that if you want to know who your mother is, if you're, I guess unfortunate that you've never met not your mother, if you want to know who your father is, if you're unfortunate enough never to have known your father, maybe he died while your mother was pregnant, or when you were young and you never knew him, or maybe he left your mother, etc. Or if you're really unfortunate, maybe your mother, practically didn't even know him or whatever. So if you want to find that out, then the first protocol would be to ask your mother, because she's the one who is, 99.9% likely to know who your father was. So you would approach your mother like that to ask, and that's the simplest process. The other option, and that equates to the descending process, because you're going to the person who knows the answer to your question. You ask them, and they tell you. It's very simple. The ascending process, doing it that way, is much more complicated. It's like you walk out into the streets, into your town, into another town, another country, etc., and you just keep asking every man you see of a certain age, "Oh, are you my father? Are you my father?" I mean, that process is ridiculous. You'll never, you'd need to be, 1 in a billion, practically speaking, to be able to find who your actual father was. So Prabhupada explains that the descending process of knowledge is a far more effective and bona fide and authentic way of understanding things and learning things. So they're the two options. So I just always think of that example that Prabhupada gave whenever you consider the vastness of what we observe, and we're only observing, you go back again to, Krishna, Mahavishnu, Lord Brahma, the vastness of what just Lord Brahma created, and then we only observe a tiny fraction of that. So I always think of that example of Srila Prabhupada. How can we ever know what's going on in terms of this universe and its creator and all of that kind of stuff? It's just the ascending process. It's just, and you see actually with scientific revelations, if you like, and they come, quite often they come, and they say, oh, in fact, I think there was one not quite recently. They found some, was it in Israel, somewhere in the Middle East? They found some, fossil of essentially of a human, although I think they give it some different name. It's like an in-between a Neanderthal and a human or whatever. They're always making these kind of distinctions. But it didn't, up to that point, it hadn't fitted into their overall theory. So they say they've revised, and that their previous understanding, and now they're giving a kind of update of that. So that's always happening, because they're always finding stuff. They're not up there looking down and seeing the big picture, the whole thing. They're like us. They're here looking up, trying to figure it all out, you know, it's just, in my estimation anyway, it's pretty ridiculous how people can have faith in that process, you know, because we're so tiny, and the stuff we're trying to find out is so vast, you know. And at that point, Srila Prabhupada once commented, he said something like, your so-called science, material science, your so-called science is also belief. If you call your way science, then our way is also science, meaning following the Vedas, following the great authorities on these subjects. So, yeah, it's a speculative, in essence, it's a speculative process. And as Prabhupada says, it's based on belief. You know, that's the thing. They have to have so much faith in whatever, you know, their processes for trying to understand the very limited things that they can understand. But there's a process, and there's an element of belief that goes into that process like that, which is quite an interesting thing, because generally speaking, the academic scientific world will look at people of faith and in kind of, not always of course, but sometimes in a kind of condescending or patronizing way, that, oh, it's just based on belief, like that. But so much of what they do is actually, you have to have faith in their processes and whatever. And why should we? Why should we have absolute faith, particularly in the science as it relates to cosmology, actually? You know, we'll leave aside all other aspects of science, you know, whatever, many of the different other aspects, particularly in relation to cosmological science. So much of it is based on faith. And belief and guesswork and speculation. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, you know, on a regular basis they will come up and they will start revising what they previously thought was correct based on new evidence that they uncover or that they find like that. And I should just give a quick mention to one book by one wonderful devotee. His name is Jyotirkarma Prabhu, who has a scientific background. And he's written a book called Forbidden Archaeology, quite an extraordinary book actually, and it's delineating all the, throughout the last, whatever it is, 100 years, 200 years, maybe more, but all the examples whereby stuff has been found, doesn't fit into their overall theory, and then there's an effort to suppress that, and that's why it's called forbidden archaeology, like that. So yeah, it's an area that is, let's say, there's an element of unreliability about what they tell us. Let's maybe put it like that. So Prabhupada was commenting on that in the context of belief and all of that. And as I say, that's particularly based on the kind of scientific area as it relates to cosmology. I talked here before, different occasions on this subject. And one report that I once read where scientists were talking about the origins of the universe, and they came up with a statement along the lines of that the universe, from the fireball of the Big Bang to the star-studded cosmos that we inhabit today and that we can look up and see, again only a fraction is really what we see, but their conclusion was that it popped into existence out of nothing. But then they go on to say that because nothing is ultimately unstable, something had to come from it. So it's an interesting thing. I find these things humorous to some degree, you know, that humorous and actually ingenious as well, I have to say. You know, it's quite brilliant, you know. I guess it's like some of our you know, accomplished politicians that, you know, they have a brilliant way of basically explaining their way out of anything. Explaining their way out of anything. It's certainly I was going to say a quality, but maybe that's the wrong way of putting it. But it's a certain art, you know, to have that ability to kind of explain your way out of anything, even the most contradictory of things. So they said that the universe, it popped into existence out of nothing, so it came from nothing. However, because nothing is unstable, which I never knew that. I never knew nothing. I thought nothing was nothing, but no, apparently nothing must be something to have the quality of instability, because they say nothing is unstable. So because it was unstable, something had to come from it. And then what came from it was all that they can see, the observable phenomena. of this material world, and the material universe is the cosmic manifestation. So it's interesting. When we first hear that, when you hear something like that, as devotees who follow the authority of the Vedas, the authority of the great acharyas, most recently, of course, the extraordinary and wonderful and glorious A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, our first reaction when you read something like that is to kind of dismiss it, as gobbledygook, and they're just coming up with flowery language to try to, whatever, present their view of the world like that. But actually, on kind of, more reflection on it, in one sense, they're saying the same thing as the Vedas. Basically they're saying that tangible matter has arisen from intangible matter. Tangible matter has arisen from intangible matter in the sense of this nothing being unstable like that. And in the Srimad-Bhagavatam is actually stated that the activities and characteristics of the ethereal element can be observed as the accommodation of the external, internal existences of all living entities, namely the field of activities, the vital air, etc., the senses and the mind. And in the purport, that's a verse from Srimad-Bhagavatam, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that verse has the potential basis of great scientific research work, for it explains how tangible elements are manifested from the subtle form. So that's, of course, our clear understanding that everything begins from the subtle, thinking, feeling and willing. So thinking is on the subtle platform, willing, and then it ultimately manifests like that. So everything is manifesting, it comes from the subtle down and manifests ultimately manifests on the gross platform like that. So to some degree that's very similar to their point about came from nothing, nothing is unstable, something had to come from it. And Prabhupada also writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually realized in the vision of a material philosopher and scientist through the manifestation of his material energy. Now that's also very interesting. Because Krishna is the creator, as you just taught, he glances and Mahavishnu comes, etc., and all the universe. So they're not acknowledging that, the scientific world, etc., that Krishna is behind it all, but they are a combination of completely fascinated and enthralled by the material creation and trying to understand it. So in that sense, that acknowledgement is there. In the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, very beginning of the 7th chapter, 7.2, Gyanam te savi, Gyanam te ham savi gyanam. Yeah, Gyanam te ham savi gyanam. That Krishna is saying to Arjuna, I shall now declare it boldly, not boldly to say boldly anyway, I shall now declare it to you in full knowledge that both phenomenal and numinous, that that he's talking about his creation, both phenomenal and numinous, and this being known, once you understand that, this being known, there's nothing further that will be unknown to you. So the phenomenal world, as Krishna is saying, once you understand that, so the phenomenal world is what we all observe, every single one of us. We just have to look out and we see the phenomenal world like that. Of course, we're only experiencing, as we've discussed already, a tiny fraction of that, because we only see one sun, yet in today's purport it's talking about millions and billions of suns. So we have to be 100% clear about that we're only observing an absolute tiny fraction of the observable phenomenal world. And then what's the noumena behind the phenomena? The noumena behind the phenomena is Krishna. Now we understand that, and we accept that, again, based on authority, based on the descending process. But the scientists, that's the part that they either haven't understood yet, or a combination of not understood and not accepted. They may have heard about it, but they haven't accepted yet. So from our point of view, in one sense, as I say, when we look at it, have an immediate look at these statements and comments about the creation coming from nothing and nothing being unstable, we can think this is just word jugglery and they're just that they're waffling, etc., and just coming up. But actually, on a deeper reflection on it, they are acknowledging the greatness of this phenomenal world. They're just not yet, as I say, either understanding or accepting the noumena behind that phenomena, or the phenomenal world, an observable world like that. So from our perspective, that's our challenge. Our challenge is to get them to both understand and accept that. And from that perspective, and going back to the point that the very beginning that I was making about ascending and descending processes of acquiring knowledge, if you're on the ascending process, so you're just doing it all off your own steam and you're trying to figure everything out, like we said, even trying to figure out who your father was, big challenge if you're just running around asking every man of a certain age. That's just an insignificant example in comparison to trying to figure out the vastness of this universe, the millions and billions of suns, and trying to figure out it's never going to be achieved. They're never going to do it. They are never going to figure out, the origins like that. And the fact that they attempt to, and that they think that they can, because they do, they think they can, and to use another expression of Srila Prabhupada's, they talk about post-dated checks. If you're in business and you give somebody something, whatever it is that you're giving them, selling them, and it costs a lot of money, for them to give you a check and then put next month's date on it, you're really taking a leap in the dark. Maybe the money will be there in a month, maybe it won't be. Maybe that check will be cash, maybe it won't be. So Prabhupada would give that example in relation to the scientists, that they're always telling us they're about to find out. And oh, look, we found another piece of the jigsaw, now we know more about this. But as I've explained earlier, so many pieces of those jigsaws that they come up with means they have to review their vision of or understanding of creation and how it all came about, or they take the less honourable route and they just try to suppress it. Oh, this doesn't fit in, this isn't good for us, this doesn't fit in, let's try to hide it like that. So the fact that they want to try and think that they can figure all of this out, I think it's fairly, and we're talking about the creation of the universe, by the way, I think it's fair to say that that's based on ego, or should I say false ego. And of course false ego is one of the material elements, one of the subtle material elements. And in the context of the creation of the material universe, we start out with the gross, there's 5 gross elements, 3 subtle elements, so 5 gross, 3 subtle. So you start out with the gross elements, and the first one is earth. And I think that's, I should have done my maths before I spoke today, but anyway, I think that's 4 billion miles thick or wide. So the earth one is 4 billion miles thick. So my feet are touching the earth now. I'm sure your feet are touching the earth as well, unless you're bouncing on a trampoline or something. So our feet are touching the earth. So we go directly from our feet 4 billion miles high. Then you have the earth covering of the material universes. And then each of the rest of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then the 3 subtle ones, mind, intelligence, false ego, they're all 10 times thicker. So earth, water. So the water, the earth covering is 4 billion, the water covering is 40 billion, earth, water, fire, the fire covering is 400 billion, etc., etc. It goes on, it gets too complicated to be able to do the multiplications. So therefore, false ego, we're talking, trillions and trillions and trillions of miles thick, this false ego covering. And it's out of false ego that we're thinking we can work all this out in terms of the creation of the universe. So the false ego is pretty big here. It's pretty big, it's pretty thick, it's pretty impenetrable in one sense. So from our perspective, and our mission, if you like, because our mission is to try to have everybody understand and accept Krishna and Krishna's glories like that. So that also includes, the cosmological scientists. So how are we going to do that if they're acting on the platform of false ego that is just so, vast? It's nearly as vast as the universe itself. The only way we'll be able to do that, the only way we'll be able to achieve that, and of course if we can achieve it, how pleased Srila Prabhupada and the founder and the previous acharyas will be with our efforts, actually, if we're able to achieve that. The blessings and the mercy and the blessings and mercy that would flow from that would just be unlimited, just like Krishna's creation. It would be unlimited. But how are we going to be able to do that? Well, we may not, of course, and that's fine too. We can only endeavor, and then Krishna determines what the results are. But in order to have the remotest chance of being successful, I think our humility and compassion in trying to explain that would have to be on a scale and of the same vastness as their false ego, actually. So rather than going head to head and berating them or trying to berate them or defeat them by arguments, somehow or another, it's very unlikely that would be successful. And much more likely to be successful is just to develop, develop maybe isn't the right word, but for us to engage in that process with unlimited compassion and humility that I guess we could only be able to manifest by praying to Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna to inspire us with that humility. Chanadapi sunichena tadodapi sahishtuna amanina manadina kitanya sadahari. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I'm looking at the time and time is going on. I'll just read the purport, the translation one more time. A few months passed and Arjuna did not return. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira then began to observe some inauspicious omens which were fearful in themselves. And just a final comment on that. This is the ushering in of Kali Yuga, and of course we're now, 5,200 and odd years into Kali Yuga. So those inauspicious signs, they're everywhere, and we just talked about some of them earlier in relation to, heat waves and all that kind of stuff. But there are so many inauspicious aspects to Kali Yuga. But we need not be fearful. That's the main thing. We need not be fearful taking shelter of Krishna's holy name. There is just simply no room for fear once we take shelter of Krishna's holy name. And by taking shelter of Krishna's holy name, and again, Tranadapi Sahijana, being able to chant Krishna's holy name with full potency, depends on us developing our sincerity and humility more and more. And the more we understand the precarious and vulnerable position we are in the material world, the more that will help us in our development of that sincerity and humility when we are calling on Krishna's name. And the more that we do that and develop those qualities of humility, compassion, etc., the more we'll have a chance of being able to convince those who are at the moment convinced on the basis of their false ego that they can figure it all out, when actually they're on the road to nowhere with that particular understanding. And therefore, the more that we develop in our Krishna consciousness, the more we realize, because we also haven't fully realized, the more we fully realize Krishna's glory, the more that we'll be able to convince others of the same. Thank you all very much. Pleasure speaking to you this morning. I hope you have a wonderful day, and indeed a wonderful life in the service of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna.